I was really interested. It was shot in northern Quebec, and it's inhospitable up there in terms of weather quite often, and it really looked realistic in the film. Was that cornstarch flying around, or were you really out in the middle of blizzards and snow?
Both.
Yeah.
We had blizzards, and we had giant fans with cornstarch. So, you know how it goes. It's like you shoot one day, and it's the perfect conditions, and 2 days later, it's sunny and 50 degrees, and, you got to figure out a way to make it match. And they did sometimes in some scenes, even though they were wintry scapes, they did have to CG in a little bit more, sort of blow by on screen. But now some of those scenes, especially at the very beginning of the movie, when I'm in the snowplow, and Mark LaBroche is wandering, in the streets of some unnamed community. When we started shooting that night, there was a big storm blowing in, but, as God would have it, 3 hours later, there's not a flake of snow floating through the air. So then they pull out the 8-foot fans and crank up the Corvette engines that drive them and start, hucking cornstarch at you. So, and it all melts together pretty well, and it looks real. I mean, you know how it is. I mean, it's still cold as all get out, and with those fans blowing, sometimes you wish the blizzard would come back and they'd turn the fans off. I mean, those fans will, they'll fling stuff at you at 60 miles an hour.
Right.
I mean, those things are punishing to stand in front of.
Well, it's Canada here too. So if you don't like the weather right now, wait 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It will change again. That's.
Yeah.
You're from California, and so
I'm actually from Texas.
From Texas.
Yeah, I know my bio.
Right?
Yeah, my bio, but we moved when I was 2. I've lived in Texas my whole life.
Right. Well, even more so than you're just unfamiliar with this weather completely. Then I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah. What was it then when you read the script? What was it? Was it the physical challenge? Was it the unusual setting? What was it that really grabbed you about this?
Those. The challenge of the circumstances that drive him to. At first, obviously, it seems like an accidental, desperate act. We learn more about those choices and circumstances along the way. But, when I read it, a buddy of mine that works with me said, sometimes you read them and you know what you know, that you got to go.
Right.
And I knew as soon as I read Whitewash, I had to go. The challenges, the character, the uniqueness of the setting, the complexity emotionally of what he goes through, and then the dynamic of Mark LaBroche's character, and that presents a whole different set of challenges, that ultimately are tragic. But I think in that tragedy, there's an honorable salvation for both characters. And by the end of the movie, there's sort of this affirmation that everybody landed on the mortal coil where they were supposed to be.
Well, it's a complicated movie. I mean, you say a complicated character, and absolutely 100%, but the movie itself kind of keeps you off balance while you're watching it, and I really liked that. I really liked that from one scene to the next, I wasn't exactly sure where this was going to go, even though on the surface, I guess because of the bleakness of the setting and the journey that he goes on, I thought this was going to be a much simpler movie than it actually turns out to be.
Right.
And as it progressed, I found myself getting more and more sucked in, thinking, where could this possibly go?
There was a review, and I always thought it was one of the very. I mean, I enjoy precise language, and I thought it was one of the most precise assessments, analysis of the movie that came out of Tribeca last year when we premiered at Tribeca, and Manny won the new director award. But there was a review that came out, and the guy said, I wasn't fully aware at the beginning of the movie that something was starting to grip me around my throat. And by the end of the movie, not only had that grip been there the entire time, but at times it's slightly relaxed, and at other times it's slightly contracted, you know, like letting me take the movie in with a different sort of pressure. But all the way, it just gripped me by the throat, and by the end I was gasping, you know, for relief. But it was like a joyous relief, that it was really like a thrilling ride. But I like that somebody had said it just grips you, and you have no idea where you're going, but that grip is going to take you somewhere.
And it does. And it's interesting because of the setting. You know, there's a scene where you're in a small store, and the clerk behind the counter, you're having a conversation with her, but it's she's not really paying attention. She's looking up from the counter and that kind of thing. And yet, for some reason, that scene really grabbed me. That scene drew me in, even though not that much happens in it. And I wasn't exactly sure why it affected me so, but I think it's because it felt real to me. And I think that is what I took away from the film, is that whatever the circumstance might be, you could boil this movie down into something pretty primal. It's about trying to survive, not only physically in very trying circumstances, but mentally as well. He's trying to work his way through this terrible accident that's happened.
Yes.
But everything around him, nothing is heightened. I guess that's what it is. Nothing's really heightened. That scene in any other movie would have been played a little differently, I think. But here it's played very realistically. It felt like a small town where people are kind of familiar with one another and they don't always pay attention. And that really grabbed me about it.
Well, I think the other part of it, that was actually like sort of a bigger scene. And we discussed it, and we got there, and we had a lot of other stuff that we were shooting that day, which included the scene where I discover Mark in the car. But there was a simplicity to, and I mentioned to Manny, I was like, what if we just start really taking the dialogue out? Right. Because there was, like, the woman, she sort of engages me, and, you know, and I'm talking to her, and we just started paring it down to what it turned out to be, which was, you know, I'm standing, you know, you see me eating through the window, and I'm looking at something, and you're not quite, you know, you see the car, but the guy walks in, asks a question, I just wordlessly get his attention, you know, he grabs it, pays, the woman never even looks up, he leaves, and I pretty much just awkwardly stand there for a bit, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get going, and, you know, she barely acknowledges my departure. And what we liked, although you just touched on the familiarity of it, what we liked was the fact that Bruce has become such a ghost in his own community. He just drifts in and out, and there's nothing terribly significant about him. Right. You know, that his presence might be nothing more than the woman pulling her sweater just a little bit tighter around her shoulders because she feels a little bit of a chill. Right. You know, that's it. It's that insignificant to her. And then when he walks out, and then he's really fixated on something, and the camera tracks with him along, and then we cut and we see him walking up, and then we start to discover what he starts to discover, that's somebody who's deliberately trying to commit suicide. Mm-hmm. And it changes the whole dynamic, you know, like the movie rotates on its axis in a very peculiar way. And you know, that's what I like about it, you know, and I agree with you. For some reason, that scene, that little debonair scene, it never tried to be a linchpin moment, but it is.
It really is. It really is. For me, it felt like kind of the hinge that the whole movie kind of opened and closed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And is it counterintuitive for you as an actor to bring it down like that in that sense? I mean, you know, when you think of some of the other movies, the Spider-Man thing, I'm sure there must have been, you know, big blockbuster stuff going on and things. And then you do something like this, and it's drawn down so much. Does it feel counterintuitive, or does it feel right, or what's your take on it?
No, because Not at all. I mean, you modulate from moment to moment in your preparation, and then obviously you have to dial it in even more when there's people working and the cameras are going and money's being spent and, locations are being paid for, and, obviously things, are taken to the next level of professional execution. But no, not counterintuitive is a precise description. And for me, no, because, even as far back as working in television comedy as long as I did, I always wanted more nuance, more reflection, more moments of whatever the whisper line between drama and comedy. What is that, and that really is just defined by human circumstance and human behavior. And even whenever we were promoting this picture that I did several years ago, Sideways, audience, we do these big Q&As with audiences, and I remember one time this guy was like, "So man, it must be really interesting, like in the dramatic scenes you make very dramatic choices, and in the comedic scenes you make very comedic choices." I said, "No, man, I know maybe it sounds a bit elitist or whatever, pseudo-intellectual, but I said, no, I just make human choices, I'm just trying to play a real guy. When I was doing television comedy, it's a real guy, but in these set-up situations for jokes and laughter.
In a broadened sense, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah.
But with Sideways, and especially with a guy as smart as Alexander Payne, he's going to pull you as far away from playing a funny moment or a funny beat as he can. He's going to pull you away from that. And the more human you play that moment, that the audience is going to respond to it the way they're supposed to, not the way they were told to.
Right.
And to me, and a lot of performances that I've had since then, in movies, like Smart People or I don't know what, Killer Joe, the ones that I'm on Whitewash. I don't want to tell anybody how to feel. I just want to give you the circumstances, and you make the choice.
Right. Here's the setup.
Yes.
You now to figure it out. And I guess, the difference between working on something like Wings or Ned and Stacy is that in those situations you're buoyed by there's a sound, there's a laugh track, or there's an audience laughing along with it, and you are telegraphing to the audience, this is the moment that we would like you to laugh, or giving you a hint. And it is a much different circumstance, I guess.
I mean, with Ned and Stacy, I had a lot more control being the star, and I was a writer on it. I was an uncredited writer. I had some other kind of a bullshit credit, but I don't even remember what it was. But I did have a lot more creative control. And on Ned and Stacy, we did attempt to make it way, way, way more spontaneous.
Right.
It's like, yes, this is scripted, and yes, we're going to do it the way it's scripted, but then we're going to turn it up and start improvising and coming up with alternative lines in front of the audience. And the producers were, and the studio and the network, absolutely on board. Because I had done 6 years on Wings, where it was very structured, and improvisation was largely discouraged, because that's the way they did business, and I respected that training.
Yeah.
I got a lot of valuable training off of doing comedy in that setting. But on Ned and Stacy for 2 years, it was a little bit more, the inmates have taken over the asylum, and the network enjoyed it. They did. Ultimately, the show didn't work, but it was a great comedy experiment that went on for a couple of years, and that was great training for me. And but yeah, you get to real film acting, you have to try a completely different style of processing a character and developing what's going to be done on screen. And my first best lesson in that world was really a movie called One Night Stand that Mike Figgis directed. That I did. The movie did not succeed, but Mike was an invaluable director at that point in my career. And then, a few years after that, I worked with a French-Canadian director, Yves Simoneau, who I also thought had a great eye for comedic dramatic. And then obviously, Alexander Payne, and then on from there, I've worked with some great directors.
Well, it's funny. That just made me think of Billy Wilder apparently watched George Clooney on ER and said, you'd be a great film actor if you didn't move your head so much.
Right.
Which is just one of those little tricks, I guess. That
Who said that? Who did?
Billy Wilder told that to George Clooney.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I never heard that before.
Yeah, you'd be a great film actor if you didn't move your head so much.
There you go.
That's our time. Thomas, thank you so much. It's been
You're very welcome.
speaking to you, and the movie's terrific. And
thank you.
Opens here on Friday, and I'm curious to see what audiences say.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.